Sunday, we were here for our service, and then we were here for half of the MCC service, which was their last service to be held here. And I think that, the theme that came out to me was love your neighbor. And I think that was on the Maundy Thursday talks. That's kind of at the heart of what Christianity has to offer. And it can be said in different ways, but love your neighbor kind of capitalizes the Christian theme. And, sometimes our UCC church and the Unitarians are criticized as not having absolutes. Everything's relative, in our church. Things can be whatever they turn out to be, and so, in considering, what is the absolute, I would say for our UCC and for and I think for Unitarians as well, the absolute is love. Love is required. And of course that's, it's hard to define. We have to each define it in our own way. Some religious groups have absolutes like if you're born a gender and that's put on your birth certificate, then that's what you have to live with. Or marriage is only between a man and a woman. For us, the absolute is love. And I think, another one is if a person makes a mistake in their life, they have to live with that or be put away for the rest of their life. Our absolute toward anyone who makes a mistake is love. Now, that's the first part of the talk, okay? Then the second part has to do with why I'm doing this Hail Mary. On Friday, I was talking to a fellow named McCarthy that I know, and his brother is a Jesuit, and I was telling him, I'm going to have my hip operated on next week, and he said, yeah, well, I got to tell you something. My youngest son is having his colon operated on today because he has colon cancer. And, I said, I guess, for me it was, lots of people say, well, I'll pray for you. They're saying they're going to pray for my hip, forget it. But I said, well, I'll say Hail Marys. Well, then I felt like a phony because I don't do Hail Marys. I don't even know, I didn't know it like you guys know it. But so then I thought I'd bring it to this, that we're, the prayer that we said was, who's going to hear it but us? But at least it is a rehearsal of love for McCarthy's youngest son, and that's the best we can do. So, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Now, the problem with it is I want to analyze it. And, when you think about it, Mary was full of grace, but I think she was full of despair before she was full of grace. How many people have to watch watch what she had to watch? And it's in art. You can see it in art of her standing and watching the suffering. And in some pictures she's standing with a couple other people, and in some pictures she's on the ground. And I imagine she was on the ground a lot. And back in that time, there were a lot of people who had to suffer to watch with what they had to see because of the Roman atrocities. And when you go to Rome and you see the Colosseum, it's like you're looking at Auschwitz. And we say, well, gee, I got to see the Colosseum. Well, it was a horrible place. And the Romans somehow, they were able to blame the Jews for the death of Jesus. But it was the Romans. So that's the thought and prayer for my friend's son. Now the story. I used to do laundry down on this story. I don't know. I guess it's not very religious. It's kind of not even religious at all. But we did those storybook things, and not all that, But I used to do laundry, back in the 80s, in the old days, down at Mrs. Bubbles on California Avenue in Burlingame. And you go down there, you wash your clothes. They had a payphone still out there, but there was a guy there. His name was it's Svetsko, and his last name was Smiley. And Svetsko would sit there and just tell stories. And it seemed like every time I was there, he was telling the same story, so I kind of got it memorized, And he coughed and sneezed and wiped his nose a lot, and while he was telling the story. And he always started the story with, anytime anybody would say something to him, he'd say, "Oh, that reminds me of," and so then he'd get going on the story. And and this time, there were a couple of times I was there, it was, "Oh, that reminds me of a guy I know, I heard of, named Harold R. Wigley, who was a nice-looking, middle-aged rabbit." And so it's kind of Easter, right? This story. But Harold R. Wigley lived in a spacious hole between us. I wrote this out and sent it to my granddaughter, and I kind of put the property and stuff so that it would look like her where she lived. But of course, they were too busy. They never read it to her. But we'll see. We'll get it. Oh, is this being recorded? Okay. So anyway, Harold lived in a spacious hole between a small garage and a fence that was behind a small house on Grand Avenue. And the house, the garage, and the fence were green, as were the weeds that hid the rabbit hole. When Harold entered the hole, there was enough light that would pour in that he could see his smiling little wife, Bunny Marla, and his little bunny kids, so many, too many to give names to. Each morning after having breakfast in his pajamas, which were furry, Harold R. Wigley would stretch out his legs and pull on a pair of green slacks, slide into and button up a white shirt, and put on a big hat enough to cover his ears. Now, Harold R. Wigley would then exit the hole, stand up straight, and walk to the bus stop on Grand Avenue. At the bus stop, he was just another gentleman waiting for a ride uptown to work. Now, Harold's job was a benefits counselor in the Human Resources Department of Garbash Construction Company. And no one at Garbash, he thought, knew that Harold was a rabbit. Smiley, would always laugh and cough and wipe up the mess in a rag that he always had in his hand. And then Smiley continued with the story by telling about how Harold met his wife Marla. Marla grew up in San Lorenzo, California. When she was a little girl bunny, she played by her home in the grass, skipping and jumping and giggling like all little girl bunnies do. When she turned into a big girl bunny, she settled in San Leandro near Grand Avenue. Each day she nibbled grass near the bus stop and hid in the weeds as people arrived at the bus stop. Marla enjoyed people watching. This was when she was still just a little girl and when Harold was still just a little boy rabbit. So Marla enjoyed people watching from the safety of the weeds, and there was Harold, a little boy bunny, sitting in the same weeds. "You like people watching too?" she asked. "No, I am learning their language. I've learned several key phrases. The bus is late. How far does this bus go? And here comes the bus." And she said, "Well, what good would it do to learn their language?" Harold looked down at Marla. "Benefits counseling. I'm going into it." Marla snapped, "You are unrealistic and nuts," and she skittered home to her safe little hole. But she thought about him the rest of the afternoon. At least he has goals, and he is not bad looking. And then, always in the middle of telling the story, Smiley would sniff and look around as though he was ready to leave. But I'd say, keep going, keep going. "All right, if you insist. I remember I was folding my clothes. I remember I was folding my clothes at certain points of this." So Marla and Harold saw each other in the weeds by the bus stop when they were young, every morning for days. And Harold was picking up more phrases, and then he learned, "I love you," and understood it was a special phrase preceding nose-to-nose encounters between certain people at the bus stop. As he gazed at Marla and noticed he loved the way she chewed grass, he knew she was the one. She did not like the way he ate grass, but she moved in with him anyway. And then came the little bunnies, and it dawned on him, "I've got to get a job. Quick." So anyway, then, Setka Smiley looked around and came back to my face. "This is where things get crazy." By this time, Harold and Marla had moved into the abandoned home between the garage and the fence behind the house. Harold R. Wigley nibbled his way into the garage and found it top to bottom with people's stuff and no car. In California, the garages are full and nobody can put their car in them. Just stuff, including a doll named Ken. Harold borrowed Ken's green slacks and white shirt and found a hat that would hide his ears. There was a box labeled resumes, and Harold had what he needed. Harold dressed up, jumped in the hole and yelled, "I'm ready to get that job." Setsko Smiley stood up and headed for the restroom. Half hour later, he was heading out the door. I stopped him and pushed him back in the chair. Finished the story. Harold R. Wigley got a job at Garbash Construction in the Human Resource Department and moved up to benefits counselor, his dream job. Everything was fine until one day in October, the last day of October. Harold went to the bus stop and found people dressed in horrible clothes. When he arrived at the office, it was the same. People looking horrible and laughing, pointing at each other. And then things grew quiet. Smiley enjoyed this part. Harold was about to relieve himself in his green slacks. They were all looking at him. "Where's your costume, Harold? Where's your costume, Harold? Where's your costume, Harold R. Wigley?" Never had Harold been questioned about his apparel. "They're going to find out. I'll lose my job and all the respect I've garnered." Harold unbuttoned his white shirt and unzipped his green slacks and hopped out of his clothes. His hat fell to the floor. There was a gasp and then silence. A voice from the back, first soft, then a yell. Harold wore his costume under his clothes. "A rabbit costume, so realistic," someone yelled. Harold stood speechless. Smiley scratched his nose. How did he do it? How did Harold R. Wigley get by without being found out? Harold knew the charade had ended. Harold could see Mr. Garbash in the back of the room was not smiling. At the end of the day, Harold walked back to Mr. Garbash's office and entered head bowed. "You know, don't you, Mr. Garbash? Was it the feet?" "Yes, and the hands. You have 4 rabbit's feet. You didn't think I would notice." "Well," Harold said, "I'll get my things and leave." "No, I'm moving you to design. You got to design tornado-proof underground housing division. Can you handle that?" Harold said, "I think I can handle that." Okay. Anyway, that's what Smiley had to say, and I wanted to share it with you just in case you remember it. All right. Oh, questions? Comments?